theyeshiva.net.
So the last three shiurim we covered till the middle of Perek Bais, which is page 82, Mem Aleph, column 3. Mem Aleph, column 3. Close to the bottom of the page. So we've been explaining and talking about the concept of a name, the concept of light, the concept of tzimtzum. They're not just concepts. This is the DNA of life. This is the building blocks, the structure that defines the entire experience of life, because the entire experience of creation and our relationship with ourselves and with the world and with our Creator. So let's continue inside. So page 82, column 1, the line starts, Shmoy Re'uvin, like 20 lines from the bottom, Shmoy Re'uvin. Speaking about Leah, why she named her son Re'uvin, because she saw the nature of his story. She saw the nature of his soul. We don't always have that acute vision. Sometimes it's from outside inside, from the outside in. By her, it was from the inside out, because she knew who he was. Therefore, she gave him the name Re'uvin. But the Shvatim were named by the Imayas, by the mothers. They had that feeling. The soul itself doesn't need a name. The body itself doesn't have a name. The shidduch, the relationship between the soul and the body, the way the soul is manifested through the body, which is very significant, but on the other hand, it's a very limited manifestation of the soul, that which is expressed through the body. Again, that's Iyar, that's shame. That's where the name comes in, and the name captures that energy. And like a name, I could know somebody's name, and it doesn't mean anything. I don't know anything. All I know is your name. Big deal, right? You get on your resume, right, for a shidduch reference for your child. So you have a name. What does that name tell you? Another person who knows the person, the name, it comes with a ganze Welt, a ganze Torah. So it's very, that's the name. So he continues. Dehine, we learned this line, but it's good to repeat this line again. Dehine kol davar hagadol, hatzarich letzamtzem es atzmai, lahachiyus shalamate b'menu, hu rak b'bchinas shmai. See, here he captures the essence of the point. It's an essential awareness. Any great thing that needs to restrict itself. Tzimtzum, of course, means restriction, condensing, limiting, filtering. Right? The concept of eclipsing, removing. Anything that has to be mitzamtzum itself. Why? Why should it be mitzamtzum itself? Because of the chiyus, out of respect to the energy level of that which is below it. The teacher has to communicate to a student on his terms. A person needs to communicate to another person on their terms. So anything that's big, that's gigantic, that's titanic, but it needs to go through a filtering process, right? Our unconscious brain to our conscious brain is probably the biggest example. What's in our unconscious brain and what it's allowed to come into my conscious thoughts. How much percent of our personality is beneath the radar? You can guess probably, right? And what's the comparison between the two? So he says anything great that needs to go through a tzimtzum in order to provide to a level of energy, chiyus, that is lower. When we say lower, it doesn't mean physically lower. Lower means a more limited form of consciousness. Hurak b'bchinas shmai. So that means he's communicating, or it's communicating its name, its shmai. The way, in other words, everything is perceived and experienced by that which is receiving it, that's called its name. The relationship of something vis-a-vis itself, you don't need name. It is what it is. A name is always how I'm hearing you, how I'm getting you, how I'm experiencing you. There's you and there's your name. Literally, a name is how I call you. But spiritually, what does a name mean? It's not just how I call you. Your name is Yisrael, your name is David, your name is Moshe, your name is Yankel, your name is Shmerel. Obviously, yeah. But here he's talking about how I call you mean anything I know about you. I know you through your name. In other words, the name represents the way you articulate yourself into my experience. That's your name. That's what the concept of Shem is. And it therefore begins with Iyar Ein Sof. It begins with Iyar Ein Sof. That's the first name, Hu Shmai. The way Ein Sof allows itself to be articulated in some form or fashion that something outside should be able to experience it. This is clear what I'm saying. It's a bissel mufshat, it's a little abstract, yeah? Anybody wants to give a mashal, maybe? Rabbi Moshe Zev, a mashal? And from the therapist's office? Oh.
As a physical concept.
You're going to give me a mashal from electromagnetic spectrums. Those are the good mashalim.
So in a way, Shem is a...
So the name represents, so if I don't have to emit, I don't need a name. The name represents that which you emit, which, as we know in light, is a frequency that resonates with the recipient, and different recipients resonate with different frequencies. Some frequencies I won't register because it's just above me. My kalim can't register, can't resonate with that frequency. Now here we understand it's not just you're emitting a light. This light that you're emitting is creating the very recipient, you understand? It's not just impacting it. It's not just a teacher teaching a class to a student and it has to resonate. It's the class that molds the identity of the student. So every single creature, every single creation on any level is a result of a different type of frequency that it's experiencing. You understand? In the mashal, you exist. I just want to communicate to you, so I have to communicate to you in a way that they could resonate with you. If not, I'm not communicating, I'm communicating to myself. Here the communication is what creates the very identity of the one you're communicating with. So the type of light that's being emitted is what's responsible for the consciousness and the very chemistry, spiritual and physical, of the creation. It's an important qualification. And thus, when there is the revelation to the other, what do we mean the revelation to other? When the I is experienced to some degree by the other, which is what we call name, that's the name, that's your name. Your name is the way. In Yiddish you would say, wie du wirst abgeteicht bei a zweiten. The way somebody else is receiving it, that's what your name is, that's what's communicated to them. On one hand, the letters of a name are just material letters. They're like, you have a Baruch, so you have Bais and Reish and Vav and Chaf, just like material letters. Ve'enam klum, like, doesn't seem to be anything there. It's just letters that you write down on a piece of paper. Bais, Reish, Vav, Chaf. And yet, when I associate that name with you, it's like, it's you. You know, Baruch, I know Baruch. I know Shalom, I know Shmedel. So he says, but those letters capture an energy, that energy which is articulated in the body. How much of the soul's energy is articulated in the body? And the answer is chiyus ma'at. Most of the neshama is not manifested in the body. Not because the body is bad, because the body has certain kalim. The body has certain kalim. And the neshama is manifested, it's embodied through the vessels of the body. That's extremely significant. That's called the name of the soul, the light of the soul, the shame of the soul. The vitality, the animation, the consciousness, and the life force that extends into all of the body. The neshama itself is the core, is the soul itself. It's far beyond embodiment. What's represented in the guf is the neshama, but again, it's like the ray of the sun, the metaphor that he gave earlier. What's light? Light is a certain frequency of the source of the light that resonates with the one who received it, based on his or her tools. Like we discussed yesterday, everything emits light, and yet so many things in the universe I don't see. Why? Because the frequency doesn't get registered by me, so I say it doesn't exist. Right? Imagine you'll define what exists and what doesn't exist based on what you see. Yeah? If you define existence and non-existence on what you see, so you know what doesn't exist. Electricity doesn't exist. Atoms don't exist. Cells don't exist. Genes for sure don't exist. DNA doesn't exist. And of course, viruses don't exist. Fungi, bacteria, germs, none of these exist. They didn't know about them until 100 years ago. Why? Because they didn't have the tools, the microscopic tools to identify something called a virus. So who poisoned the wells? The Jews or the devil? Of course. They still poison the wells, huh? Right. In other words, the Black Plague, what did they attribute to? Whatever they attributed to the devils, the Jews, and this, because they didn't have the kalim to identify this type of creation, so it doesn't exist. It was too small. So it means it doesn't exist. It means that the light doesn't resonate with me. The Iyar was not mitzumtzum in a way that my retina, my sensors and my brain can pick it up and interpret it. The same is true with everything. So that's the concept of shame. So which part of the neshama is expressed in the body? That which the body captures, which is amazing. It's unbelievable what the brain has. But he said it's limited based on the vessel of the brain. And it's this light, it's this flow, and he keeps on calling it ha'ara, which is the that comes from the source, from the mar. This ha'ara, this is nishrash, this is eingewurzelt. It's rooted, it becomes embedded, engraved, so to speak, in the letters of the name. That's what the letters articulate. They articulate the ha'ara. Lachein, Hashem shayich davke b'slapshus haneshama beguf. And that's why the name only applies when the soul and the body meet, when there's a hislapshus, it's an interesting word, hislapshus. The soul gets enclosed like a lavush, it gets dressed up. Of course, we're not talking about a physical garment that you take off. The guf is one with the soul, but it's still a melubish, it's manifested through and in the body. Because then the light is actualized, then the light is emitted, because the body needs to become alive. And that energy is channeled through those wires, through those channels, through those conduits, through those emitters, which are the letters of the name. And therefore Adam gave every creature a different name. And you can't confuse the names. It's not, the Ramban says that the names in Lashon Kodesh are not Hashem Heskemi, it's his word. It's not a name that everybody agrees on. Its power is not the vote, right, of the linguistic academy. Its power is the chemistry, the laws of chemistry, the laws of biology, the laws of nature. In other words, the name comes from reality. The name is not just something that we agree on for our convenience, because you need names in order to be able to communicate. Sometimes when a person is in a faint, it says calling by the name is helpful, because it's like he resonates. I say it's frequency. It's like a dosage of the energy. Yeah. There's a word, I think, from Pinchas Koritzer. He was a student of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. He said a very powerful word. He said that in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, the Jewish people were in a comatose state. It was after the pogroms, the Ukrainian pogroms of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, 1648-49, Tachtat, which destroyed Polish and Ukrainian Jewry in the hundreds of thousands. Reb Nosson Hanever, as a sefer, Yavon Metzula describes he was a historian of the time, Reb Nosson Hanever. He has a sefer called Yavon Metzula. He describes the atrocities of Tachtat. It was, in our generation, because of the Holocaust, it eclipsed everything else. But till the Holocaust, Tachtat was extremely significant in terms of the destruction it wreaked. And then also there was the Shabsosai debacle right before the Baal Shem Tov, which was another major catastrophe. And generally it was just, the Gullahs got to the Jewish people. So the Pinchas Koritzer said the Jews were in a comatose state. They were verschlafen, verchalished. So what do you do when somebody's in a coma? You whisper their name into their ear. So the Rebbeinu Shalom whispered the name of Klal Yisrael into its ear. What's its name? Yisrael. And that was the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov's name is Yisrael. So essentially the Baal Shem Tov was a divine whisper. That's what he was. The very presence of the Baal Shem Tov was Hashem whispering the name of the Jewish people into their ear, Yisrael. And what happens? You come back to life, you learn who you are. All you need to know is, your name, you have a name. Yeah. That's why his name was Yisra. Before the soul descends in the body, when we say before, we're not talking only in time. Remember, when it says before, there's always a before. Before means in a state that is beyond that which is embodied. The Kaidim Yidasa Beguf is not just before, once happened before you were born. It's also after you're born. The state of the neshama, the way it's being embodied, which always exists, because the soul is not like made up of 1,000 pieces. It always exists. It's the higher state of your consciousness, the higher state. So he says, that nekuda ha'ara zu klula b'mahusa v'atzmusa b'bchinas bittul mamash. Al kein ein nikras b'shem, ki Hashem urak b'chinas adam ha'sheket musa v'atzmusa. You see, everything we spoke about, Hayahu, Shmai Bilvad, he now replies to a person. Before the soul comes into the body, it's not that the Oid is not there. Of course it's there. The ray of the sun is also in the solar core, but it doesn't have a name over there. Why? Because it's subsumed in its essence. It's seen in a different context. Over there, the name is not separate from the essence. It's part of the essence. And when I say part, I don't mean part like a part of a puzzle. Part, I mean, its very identity is just the essence itself. It doesn't have a separate story, a separate identity, a distinct identity. After it emerges, it emits, suddenly it can be given its own name, its own yichus, its own identity, its own story. Everything is there before, but it's just subsumed. It's nichla b'mahusa v'atzmusa in the essence. He calls it the b'chinas bittul mamash. What is bittul mamash? Bittul mamash means it doesn't occupy any separate space. It's completely aligned with the core. And that's why it doesn't have a name. The name only captures a ha'ara. Once the ray of the sun leaves the sun, and now it assumes its distinct identity to the point that you can even not see it as a reflection of the source. Or even if you see it as a reflection of the source, it went through a lot of filters and a lot of tzimtzumim, then it assumes this name. And that's what the name is. But in its essence, the Oid is there, everything is there. It's not like it comes out later. But what is it? Over there, it's part of the infinite essence that doesn't have a description, that doesn't have a name. Why is this so relevant? Because what this means is that everything could be experienced on different levels. Everything could be interpreted on different levels. Even the shame, if it's taken back to its source, if it's traced back to its source, what is it? It's infinity. And that's what we were trying to touch on yesterday, that once something has a name, it often gets fixed into a particular box, and this is what it is. But if you can take the shame back to its source, over there the name is just another heichetimtza, it's just another manifestation of the infinite source. There's no gulf in between them. In other words, every shame can be experienced as it is already a name, but if it's taken back, if you go back, if you trace it back to its progenitor, so to speak, to its mother, to its father, he says it's not separate from the mohus va'atzmos. That's the concept of Achlei Nivra Ha'olam Hayahu Ushmai. The Shmai was also there, but the Shmai is completely part of the infinite essence. Now this has a lot of ramifications in Avodah on many levels, but two very brief points, and we could pause there for a long time, but I just want to say the points briefly because I want to move on. But two very brief points is, it means that nothing has to be amputated, nothing has to be removed, nothing has to be eliminated from a person's life. It just has to be traced back to its origin. Right? Essentially, everything is one. We're all one. Everybody is rooted in the Ein Sof, in the infinity. The shame is the way it gets articulated. How many names are there? A person can have 1 billion names. Much more than that. Every hour, your name could change. What do they say? The Eskimos have 70 names, 70 names for snow. I don't know if that's a legend or it's reality, but they have a lot of names for snow. Names change. Depends on the ha'ara, right? Depends on the ha'ara. But essentially, the point is that nothing ultimately has to be eliminated. What you want to do is you want to trace it back to the Shayrish, because if you trace it back to the source, then it's part of Ein Sof. That's extremely, extremely important. So nothing has to be removed. And another major point is that a person always has to know the limitation of a name. We need names because it articulates everything, but we have to understand that it's only a limited interpretation of it, and when you can take it back to its source, a lot of healing can happen. Not just healing, but complete transformation. So that's why it's so important to understand this contrast. The name is real. It's real as an articulation, which is also real, because that articulation is also part of the source. It's one of the potentials in which the source can be emitted. Yeah. Right, so here you see it's very subtle. On one hand, it's from the sun. It's not a fake thing, right? It's a certain articulation, but the way the sun can be articulated in a single ray of light. And how do you compare that to the whole sun? It's Be'ein Aroich, right? What is it, 1%, 2%? How much electricity is emitted from the sun in a single ray of light relative to the whole sun?
I mean, the density there is such that
we wouldn't even have the numbers for it, right?
would not be able to even withstand it. It's a nuclear reaction.
Yeah. The ray of the sun we enjoy. With vitamin D, it gives us light, it gives us warmth. If I would have the sun itself, it would wipe us away, right? So it's the name, it's the Iyar that articulates the sun in a way that our planet can live, gewaldig. And we're thankful for it. We have a special bracha every day. Baruch atah Hashem, Yotzer HaMa'oros, right? We thank Hashem. We don't take the sun for granted. I once told you the story in Chaim. They were debating in Chaim what's more important, the sun or the moon. So after 7 days, they concluded that the moon is much more important because the sun shines when you don't need it during the daytime. Who needs the sun during the daytime? But the moon is a chiddush. The moon shines at night. Right? So it's very easy to take for granted that which is so much part of life. So that's an example for Shem. Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's Isis. Shem is Isis, yeah. Isis is a metaphor, yeah. That's the concept, yeah. Nimtze moving. So what do we learn from all this? Gamken. The inyan Hashem u gamken al derech mashal de b'chinas ha'ara ma she'einin negei la'atzmi is klal. So the result is that what Chazal call in one place ha'ara, in Tanakh it's called a name. Like you said before, in Gemara it's called Ziv, in Zohar it's called Iyar, in Eitz Chaim it's called Iyar Ein Sof, in Pirkei Rebbe Lezer it's called Shmai, in Tanakh it's called his name. And that's the same concept like Ha'ara. She'eini negei la'atzmi klal, it doesn't touch, it doesn't affect, it doesn't capture the atzmius, the core. And if even the Iyar is not communicated like this, the clouds are blocking it, it's not like the sun melts away, like the sun is hurt. The soul itself doesn't need a name. When it's extended and manifested and embodied, that's the name. And that name channels it. Then the name is not just important. The name is extremely important. The name is vital. Vital, pun intended. The same is true Lamaila. We say Lamaila, we mean Lamaila again doesn't mean above on a higher floor. Lamaila means that this is all an understanding of the entire relationship between the Boirei and the Nivra, the creator and the creation. When we say Hashem creates, sustains, gives existence to the world, it's a manifestation of name. Everything is divine energy. The whole chiyus of the world is divine energy. But what is it? It's called Hashem's name. And that's why that word is frequently used in Tanakh, and frequently used in Chazal, and frequently used in the Nusach of Tfilas. The name. Because the name is, again, like the light that is manifested and becomes the consciousness of the universe. Whether it's my consciousness or your consciousness or the consciousness of a mosquito or the consciousness of a bear or an elephant or the consciousness of a tree or the consciousness that exists in a rock. There's endless names because there's endless manifestations, but it's all name. And that's why everything has a different name. Basara mamaris nivra ha'olam. And from those 10 mamaris, every single nivra evolves through the oisius of Lashon HaKodesh, through the Chav Beis oisius. There's a Sefer HaPardes from the Ramak, Moshe Cordovera, right? So he there has Shar Hashemis, and he goes through how the names of Asar Mamoris, it goes through what's called tzirufim, transmutations, right? It goes through all these types of mutations, which is really, literally genetic mutations, literally, spiritually genetic mutations that create the chemistry of every single nivra. But what is it? It's all defined by Shmai, by name. What's pshat ha'atzmus lo yichelim lizbil? The atzmus, core itself, they wouldn't be able to contain and remain defined in their parameters, right? For me to be able to remain who I am, to know my I, if I'm experiencing the core the way it is, so then everything is just part of that. There's no distinctive identity. Right. We enjoy the sun. Beautiful sunny day. When is winter going to end? Baruch Hashem, spring is here, summer is here, right? You're saying that Baruch Hashem, summer is here is only because we don't get most of it. Right, we don't get toasted by it. It's just important to say that in the Nimshal, it's not mamish like that, because in the Nimshal, it wouldn't be destruction, it would just be, you would be subsumed in infinity, which is destruction, but it's a different type of destruction. Just want to say that, huh? It says in Gemara Rosh Hashanah, Shit Alfa Shnin Hava Alma, V'chad Charuv. It's the end of Rosh Hashanah, Daf Lamed Aleph. 6,000 years, the famous Gemara, 6,000 years is the world, and then the 7th millennium is Charuv, is destruction. So the Balatanya teaches what's Chad Charuv? Chad Charuv is Bittel. That the world is revealed as part of Ein Sof, so it's called Charuv. In other words, destruction in the sense that my old paradigms get destroyed. It's a different type of destruction. I thought I was finite. Now I learned I was infinite. It's a different type of churban. It's also a churban. It's also a churban. But it's a good churban, right? It's a good churban. You had a certain perception of who you are and who you're not, and suddenly you learn that it's a whole different metzius. So it's chad charuf. It's a different type of churban. Huh? Yeah. And the truth is, on a deeper level, every churban in a person's life is really a reflection of that churban. Every churban is to open up the kelim to be able to experience a deeper self. But that's a big statement. So, what makes it a churban is that there's a dissonance, that I don't know who I am, and yeah, it's when the name takes over, and the name also becomes a distortion. Sometimes you have a name that taka reflects. The light of the sun comes out in the ray of the sun, right? But sometimes that ray goes through so many distortions, and now it's already something else. That's already distortion after distortion after distortion. Yeah, that's the core. The core never changes. That's why he'll always say, the Atzmus won't be affected. Atzmus, why is that so important? Now let's say Atzmus is affected. He keeps on Alter Rebbe in almost all the Maimonim. Even if there's clouds and there's you put down all the shutters and you close the windows, the Shemesh itself is not affected. Yeah, but Atzmis, why is that so negeya? So philosophically, you'll say, because Hashem doesn't get changed. But the truth is, it's the yesod of everything, because it means that core cannot be damaged. It could never be distorted. No matter how many distortions, no matter how many mistakes I made, and even if the mistakes were conscious, even if the mistakes were deliberate, because I didn't know who I was. Yeah, the Gemara says in Saiter, Lakish says, "Ein adam over aved elam kein nichnas by ruach shtus." Ish kisista ishta kisista. He learns out. A person is not over aved unless there's a ruach shtus. Rish Lakish was a maven on this sugya, because the Gemara describes the whole history of Rish Lakish. He was a gladiator. He was, he came from a different world. He didn't come from the world of Torah. The whole story about Metzia with Rabbi Yochanan, you remember the story. So Rabbi Shlokish said, there's always a spirit of insanity that goes into a person. Now, what does he mean, insanity? Nobody sins if they're not insane, really? Everyone who sins is a Meshugana? Everyone who sins is a Ruach Shtus, Mamish? But what Rabbi Shlokish means, what he means, Kipshut, is a Ruach Shtus, meaning there's something there's some shtus that went into me. There's something that's being blocked. There's some reality that I'm not in touch with. In other words, if I was in touch with reality, I wouldn't be engaging in this. There's something that's cut off. Something is offline. Something is not receiving the flow of energy. And you could see it practically. You could see it in every person's life, right? When it comes to addictions, it comes to bad habits. There's something that overtook me. Whatever it is, whether it's shame, whether it's horrible pain or loneliness or anger. And I'm trying to cope. It's a coping mechanism. It's a coping mechanism that comes from a ruach shtus. There's no complete lucidity. I'm not completely lucid. That's the word, lucid. You know what lucid means? Huh? Klar, yeah. Yeah. V'gam b'bchinas shmoi. Even the name, Ksiv, Nizgov Shmoi Levada. We say every morning in Psukkah de Zimra from Tehillim. You remember the piece about all the elements of nature. Yahalalu Hashem Hashem, Ki Nizgov Shmoi Levada, Hoide Aleretz V'Shamayim V'Eram Karen Yisrael, V'Eram Karen Lama. So he says, Nizgov Shmoi Levada. We praise the name of Hashem. Everyone teaches, whenever it says, Yahalalu Hashem Hashem, Yahalalu Hashem Hashem, you praise the name of God, right? The point is, you only praise the name. It's not just you praise the name. You praise only the name. And even the name is Nizgav Shmoi. Nizgav means it's exalted. It's aloof. Nizgav. Nizgav mimeni, right? It's completely above. Even Shmoi is not a mahava. Elohu levada. Even Shmoi is levada. It doesn't mean it's levada. It remains alone. It remains singular. What do you mean it remains singular? There's a hishavos. That's not Shmoi. From Shmoi itself, it's still levada. If Shmoi was manifested, it would still be levada. Levada means einoid movada, alone. Only him. Dahainu shmoi gamkin eine begede mahava machayekla. Elohu levada. V'nizgov meir ala flaga yisera shom muflag harbe me'olam esanet salam. Nizgov means completely aloof. Even the highest worlds that are called Ne'etzalim, not Nivroim. You know, in Kabbalah there's Atzilus before Bria. What's the difference? Bria is creation. Atzilus is, in English, it's called emanation. Hashem tells Moshe in Ba'aloischa, V'atzalti min haruach asher alecha. I will, V'atzalti, Shekoyach, upshaden. I will confer. The word is confer. I will take some of your energy, your spirit, and I will confer it upon them. Rashi says, "Kemadlik ner miner." It's like lighting a candle from another candle. That's not bria. It's not bria. It's like emanation, like the ray of the sun. It's Moshe's reflection. It's like when you look in a mirror. The mirror is a reflection of you. So he says, so that's called atzilus, not bria. Bria is a creation. We'll soon see the difference. Bria is yesh me'ayin. Even atzilus, which is l'cha'ira, an emanation, he says it's nizgav even from olam esanetzal. Shmoi, that's even shmoi. In other words, if there would be true shmoi, it would still be levada. What do you mean? But you just said that the whole bria comes from shmoi. So he says, rak ki hoide alaretz v'shamayim. Pirush, shenimshach hoid v'ziv mishmoi, l'chayis eretz v'shamayim. You look in the pasuk, Yehalalu Hashem Hashem, ki nizgav shmoi levadoi. Hoidoi. Hoidoi is the ray of Shmoi. That's what reaches earth and heaven. Hoidoi of the Shmoi al eretz v'shamayim. V'zeu ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh. Shegam b'chinas shimcha kadosh amuvdal. There's ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh. What's the difference? We look at it as a repetition. You're holy, your name is holy. Just to make davening a little longer. You're holy, you're holy. Ata echad v'shimcha echad. I thought you were one and your name was not one. You're holy, your name is not holy. Your name is holy, you're not holy. What's the Ata and Shimcha? Here you right away see in the Lashonis of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, Atzmus and Oir. Ata is you. Shimcha is your name. Your name is also you. But your name is the way the you is articulated to me. That's her name, right? So Ata Kaddish, V'Shimcha is also Kaddish. V'Shimcha is also Kaddish. What does Kaddish mean? Kaddish means, as we said, aloof, nizgav. What do we mean aloof? Aloof doesn't mean it's not here. Aloof means that if Shimcha was completely manifested, the experience of life would be levadai, only him, which means everything would be part of oneness, even from Shimcha, not only from Ata. Why? Because even Shimcha is an articulation of infinity. And when infinity articulates itself, right, it captures the sun, even though it's only Shimcha. So you need from Shimcha, there should be yet another height, a ray from the ray that can allow ultimately the consciousness of Eretz V'Shamayim. So Yahalalu as Shem Hashem, ki nizgov shmoy levada, hoide al Eretz V'Shamayim. Umasha nimshach b'bchinas memale kalalman, k'mo yishan Hashem memale asaguf, zehurak ha'ara de ha'ara. If so, what comes out as memale kalalman? What's memale kalalman? Memale kalalman is gefrekt nechten. It gefrekt memale kalalman, zet the mechaven given. That which comes out mamale. What's mamale? It fills the worlds. What does fill mean? The Gemara says in Brachas Daf Yud, Ma neshama mamale saguf. Kacha kadosh baruch hu mal. Fill is a very important word. Because what does fill mean? Fill doesn't mean it's here. Everything is, Atzmus is also here. Fill means that the Keli experiences it. You understand? If I pour, this is a 7 ounces, 8 ounces. If I pour in 100 ounces here, it can't fill the cup. Filling always means 7 ounces of water can fit the cup because it suits the dimensions of this particular cup. This is about this cup, and then there's this cup. Everything has its dimensions. Mamalik al-Almin is the divine energy that's tailor-made to the unique chemistry of that nivra. It's not just tailor-made, it makes the chemistry. Again, you always have to remember the difference of the mashal and the nimshal. In the mashal, I come and fill the cup. In the nimshal, it's the level of energy that is communicated that creates the very cup that experiences that energy. Yeah. 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 So b'meila, that ha'ara, that's called ha'ara de ha'ara, array of array. V'zel, this is the pshat. It says in Tehillim, Perik Menvav, L'chu chazu mif'alois Hashem asher sam shamois ba'aretz. You know this pasuk. V'amru razal perekama de brachas al tikra shamas al shemas. Come see the mif'alois, in Hebrew they call mif'al a factory. But the reason they call it a factory is because come and see the mif'alois, come and see the workings of the Rebbeinu Shalom, asher some who creates shamais. Shamais from the word shmama, desolateness, ba'aretz, in the earth. In other words, the whole world is his, and he could do with the world kirtzayneh, and sometimes it's some shamais from the word shmama, right? Va'aretz tishar shmama, desolateness in the earth. So the Gemara says in Brachas, don't say shamas, say shemus. He creates names. Well, what's pshat? So he says a very powerful word. There's not one name, there's many names. We spoke about a name, but how many names are there? Many names. There's many different names. Why? Because depends which world you're in, depends who you are. You can't compare the consciousness of a neshama of one world to a neshama of another world, the consciousness of a person to a donkey, the consciousness of a plant to a rock, the consciousness of an angel, to the consciousness of an ant. But everything has chiyus. So it all depends on the name. Shmoi HaGadol is the great name, but you can't necessarily receive from it. So it has to go through many levels. So he says like this, every madrega, what for me is essence is relative to another level name. In other words, for me, what is above me relative to what is above that, it's only a shame. You understand? And why? Because it's that which comes to a lower flow. So there's name after name after name. The Baal Shem Tov once said that for every question he has an answer. But for every answer he has a question. So they said, why? So the Baal Shem Tov said, because what's a question in one world is an answer in another world. As you go up, the journey continues. So he says, so every madrega, legabe the lower level, it's the essence. Legabe a higher level, it's only a shame, and so on and so forth. So therefore, v'kulam imenu yizbarach. And that's why there's so many shinuyim ba'olamis. Why are there so many shinuyim? Because that's part of the process. It depends which element, which shame is being communicated. After the parentheses, he brings from the Parshas, that you can have even two people with the same name and they have different personalities, because the name itself can exist on many frequencies. He says you have two people the same name, the Chedesh have the same personality. They don't have completely opposite personalities, because the names, it could be the same letters themselves, but they can exist on different levels. V'hine Hashem einay klum keneged ha'atzmis. We spoke already that the name, you can't compare, it has no value relative to the core. U'ke'efes nechshav. V'zel. So this is what the pasuk is saying. L'chu chazu mefalos havaya. Go see the mif'alos, the workings of Hashem. Hi hapliya hagdoila. It's the great wonder. Shehu ein seif baruch hu amahava kol ha'olam is tamid me'ayin liyesh b'dibura. Hashem, the infinite one, creates all of the worlds constantly, from ayin to yesh, from a state of ayin, from a state of nothingness into a state of somethingness, b'dibura, through his words. Asher sam shama is ba'aretz loshen shmama. What's Shama? It's not that he destroys the world. Why would that be such a nice thing to see? Go see the destruction. So he says it something much deeper. Some Shama is Lashon Shmama, desolateness. Shebe'emes afilu kol ha'olamis mereish kol dargin hurak shmama neged atzmusi yisbarach. What it means is that the very definition of the world, even the highest world, legabe atzmus, is called shmama. It's called desolate. It's called a churban. It's called desolate. Why? Because it compromises and eclipses so much of the truth. That's where Churban begins. That's where Shmama begins. Destruction doesn't begin when I destroy my life. It begins in a much more subtle place. It begins in the disconnection from infinity to finiteness. Now that's good news, because it means that the trauma of existence doesn't begin when a traumatic event happens. The trauma of existence begins when God decided to have a name. In other words, that reality can be articulated as something separate from pure infinity. The moment I'm separate from pure infinity, I'm not a manifestation of the full Ein Sof. Now the only question is, what story do I tell myself who I am? So one day I'm a good guy, and one day I'm a loser. But the problem is I'm busy telling stories. That's where Shmama begins. You hear Shmama, he says Shmama begins, even the highest world is a churban. Why? Because L'gabe Atzmos, it's already a definition. That's where the Gemara says, Al tikre shamas el shemus. You hear the word? Al tikre shamas el shemus. We're not talking here about a churban, a Putin war. It starts much deeper. Al tikre shemus. It starts off from the shame. The shame is where Shmama begins. Why? Because it compromises. It's everything. The name is everything, and it's also nothing. What would I do without a name? What would I do without a name? What would people do without their name? Yeah, the name. That's tzimtzum. That's what we learned yesterday. Hu is shmoi belvad. Of course, that's what we do in our world. We turn people into numbers. We turn people into names. Names, mele, you turn them even into numbers, right? Like prisoners. You turn them into numbers. The survivors always talk about when they came into the camps. After a few minutes, we're talking about those who weren't sent to the gas chambers. They got their number, and I wasn't a person anymore. I was just a number. And even that not, So that's the ultimate distortion, where the person could become exploited and manipulated and chas v'shalom abused. But the beginning, and then I start believing it about myself. And I'm in a place of shmama. I'm in a place of desolateness. Shmama means desolate. You know what desolate means? Wie sagt man auf Yiddish shmama? Wist, say again. Wist. Pusten wist. Pisten wist. Soyu vavoyu, yeah. Desolate. You come into a situation, you go into Mariupol in Ukraine, right? Desolate. Shmama, it's after a catastrophe. So Al tikre shamas el shemus. L'chu chazum if alles Hashem. You have to understand this, that from Ein Sof Mamish, came the Chiddush of Hashem, and even the highest world is still an inyan of Shmama relative to the truth of Ein Sof. Okay, I think our time is up. Hagama's Meredvig and Ein Sof, but we're also talking about Shema, so we have to link the two. So it's a very long maimer, and I don't want to fall behind in the dates, Parshas. So tomorrow there'll be a shir. For those who want, We'll learn tomorrow the same time. That's Wednesday morning. And it's also online. If you can't make it, you can hear it online. You can watch the replay, etc. Because I don't want you to miss those who can't come tomorrow. Bli neder. You could tell your wives there's a class today, 12:45 for women in the tent here. Everybody have Atzlacha Rabba and a beautiful day. Thank you. Reb Moshe B'Steifus. With a name like Moshe, you can't go wrong. Lag ba'omer b'gematria Moshe. Some Sofer writes, Lag ba'omer b'gematria Moshe. Bnei Yissaschar writes. The Ramaz Yartzeit, huh?
Every day it goes over the year.
Oh, Reb Moshe. Yeah. He's coming for like 20 years. Lag ba'omer is not b'gematria Moshe. I saw the Chaim Sofer, I didn't even make the cheshbon, I trusted him. It's not? It is.
Somebody used to come for a koil. I used to ask Moshe. Moshe's big matri gan. I was like, "Wie soll mit dem koil?"
Say again.
I go for a job in
The Ramaz Yartzeit is Lag ba'omer. His name is also Reb Moshe.
Nigla and Nifta goes together, all the Rebbe said.
345 Lag ba'omer. Yeah, it makes sense, I think. I don't know if Machad the cheshbon, but
How could Shmoy be Shmoma if all of Mein Amor? Tifa Inge, was?
you're saying if Eid is main hamayir, if Eid reflects the mayir, how can it be shmama?
If you have a name,
Well, first of all, he says here it's ha'ara de ha'ara. Yehalalu es Shem Hashem ki nizgov shmoy levadei haydei mamala kalam gladet v'shamayim. So that's shmama. That's what he says here.
so when you have a name, and someone doesn't understand what that name means,
Shimcha Kodesh is not the Mala.
Right. Shimcha is beyond mamala.
It's Mashma from Du. There's Stekel Du.
Yeah.
so if someone has to name Moshe,
L'chul chazu mif'alas Hashem asesam shamois ba'aretz. Al tikre shamas al shemas. Mashbis milchamas ad k'tzei aretz. You hear the word, al tikre shamas al shemas. That the shamas we're talking about is the shame. We're not talking about shamas. That's this you have to see. L'chul chazu, to understand that even a definition of the highest definition is a shmama. It's not. It's a compromise. Don't. What do they say? Don't surrender to a mediocre interpretation of yourself. Verstehst? Yeah. So dann mein Mann der Balatanya sagt, als de Nehi von der Mashpia wird der Chabad von der Makabel. The Netzach Hoid Yesoid of the Mashpia becomes the Chachma Bina Das of the student. You understand? That's what he says, that every level, right, when it has to communicate to the lower level, it's only its name. Only its name. Even though what it received from the higher level was only its name. But its atzmius comes from the shame of the higher. Yeah. The malchus of the mashpia becomes the keser of the makabel. That's how it is. Yeah. If I know who you are, so then I hear your name, I may just start smiling, right, inside.
otherwise you think,
Another person just knows the name, it's nothing there. And that's a metaphor for the tzimtzum. Everything is in the letters and nothing is there. As I said yesterday, I could memorize words from the Mishnah, and I know all the words, but I know nothing. I just have words. I just have physical words. Aleph, Bais, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav. It's a beautiful thing, but it's not. You have a piece of paper.
and if someone doesn't know Hebrew,
An architect may work on a plan, right? Brilliant. Took him 5 years, 10 years. I have the paper, but I don't have a house, and I may not even know how to decipher it. For me, it's worthless. You know, a programmer will write a back-end program that's brilliant. It's genius. Took him 25 years. He gives it to me. All I see is gibberish. Right? So I have nothing. Even though I could sell it maybe for $10 million. But I don't know why.
you'll probably sell for $50.
Another person sees it and like, oh my, wow. So who's right? The answer is it's Isis, right? If you see the Eir in the Isis, then it's unbelievable. If you don't see the Eir in the Isis, you just have dead Isis, lifeless Isis. So that's a mashal for tzimtzum. It's a metaphor. Isis is a metaphor. It's a very interesting metaphor that he keeps on using, because today we know, and this was not known at this time, that DNA is defined by scientists as letters, right? Like a computer program. Even though it's not letters, it's not really letters, but DNA, when they talk about DNA, they talk about it as oisius, as letters. That means essentially the genetic code of every organism is oisius. So that's an amazing thing.
Gigantic book.
It's a gigantic book. So basically, what is life? What is life on our planet? It's a book. It's a sefer. Every creature itself has a sefer, and together it's one huge sefer. Zes sefer told us other. So when it says, Vayomer Elokim, God said, He spoke the world into existence, it was always seen as some strange metaphor. He spoke the world. Today, that's chemistry. Of course, He spoke the world into existence. All words, all letters, and it's sequences. It's a program. It's Pashta program code. That's what it is. The world is Dibur. It's Oisius. Now, Oisius have everything in them, but you have to be able to know how to see the Oisius. If not, you could be a geneticist, you could be a chemist, you could be a physicist, right? You see God every second of the day, and you're busy saying, it's random, it's a mistake, it just happened by the Big Bang.
You don't see the code.
You don't see
the programmer.
You don't see the program. All you see is letters, when really the letters are a manifestation of everything.
It's the biggest compliment for a programmer when people look at the program and they don't see the program. I just want to show you an example. This is my program. People don't even realize this is a program.
Wow.
There's something behind it that you can actually.
That's beautiful.
Use something.
So this is a very good mashal for this world. Hashem wrote such a good program.
Yeah.
We don't see the programmer. It runs so well. When I'm using my computer, it seems so efficient and perfect. Somebody had to do this. It's so good. It's so.
Touch the screen and
Huh?
you just touch it.
It only shows how good He is, right? He's so good that I forget about Him. God did such a good job, that you can ignore Him. Yeah. The Alter Rebbe's word shein. Macht a Brache und noch keine essen. It's a word, huh? He said that's shein, mave. Macht a Brache und noch keine essen.
By the way, this is
The Edelkeit, huh? It's a word from the Chartkever. Bishol of Chartkov. I saw in his Sefer once. The Gemara says in Brachas, Kol hanenem in ha'olam hazeh b'loi bracha, ki'ilu gazal, ki'ilu mal, ki'ilu nenem mekatche shamayim. If you have a no from ha'olam hazeh without a bracha, it's like you're stealing, it's me'ilah. So he teaches, Kol hanenem in ha'olam hazeh b'loi bracha. If somebody's having a no from ha'olam hazeh, not mitzad the bracha. Not that he doesn't make a bracha. He says, really the hana from ha'olam hazeh is it's an opportunity to make a bracha. What's the hana of a coffee? Before I drink, I could say, shahakal niyeh b'dvarei. Before I drink water, he says, that's the hana. Kol hanenem in ha'olam hazeh b'loi bracha. If the hana from ha'olam hazeh is not from it's not talking about a Jew who doesn't make a bracha. He makes a bracha. His hana from ha'olam hazeh is not from the bracha. Really the hana is, you're eating a tomato. It's an opportunity to make a bracha. It's a gavaldik hana. Where do you get such a pleasure in life? Only if I don't eat the tomato, I can't make a bracha. If I eat the tomato, I can make a bracha. So that's the enjoyment of the tomato, or the steak, or the chicken, or the potato, or the coffee, whatever. But if you're nenem in ha'olam hazeh b'loi bracha, not from the bracha, from the ha'olam hazeh, he says then the person is. The has the word, geschmack word, the chart cover. Was?
You could use numbers also.
Or sharks, big sharks.
Well, those given the nominator.
Yeah. The mashal is oisius because the oisius can have a teichen. Oisius are kalim for an idea or for an emotion. Oisius are kalim, they're vessels, they're conduits. So oisius is a mashal for kalim. Verstehst? And then the oir fills the keli. So the first symptom, that symptom we spoke about yesterday, that created kalim, so to speak. What's this kalim? That's a mashal for oisius. On one hand, I could see the ois and see everything. I could see the ois and see nothing, and that's the chiddush of the symptom.
So this is what I still don't understand. This was Shem Hashem.
It's how it brings
Shem Purish, the Kodesh. Was it before Tzimtzum or after Tzimtzum? Because if Tzimtzum is creation of all the oases and ultimately creation of the world, was the Shem before or not? So if he was after the Tzimtzum, then why we say Shmo? So this is what I didn't understand. The timing.
Excellent question. So the answer is, the way pre-Tzimtzum, pre-Bria, the shame is subsumed in the essence. It's not separate. It can't be seen as separate. It's just completely part and parcel of the Atzmos itself. In other words, it's like, so to say, the ray of the sun, the way it's in the solar core. It doesn't have a distinct identity. You don't even talk about it. You don't say, oh, you see of the ray of the sun inside the sun.
So it was Taka before.
It was all there.
It was there.
But I won't say it was there, because over there, it is infinite. In other words, the ultimate bittul is the ultimate yesh. The yesh amiti.
Because without it, he would not be bittul.
And I'm saying because the ultimate bittul takes the world to a place where it exists as infinity.
Yeah. By the way, you know that
The less bittul, the less yesh. The less bittul, right? It comes out on as its own thing. It's much more compromised. It's much more limited. It's shmama. It's desolate.
By the way, you know what today theoretically.
Rabbi Isaac has teufels given. You remember we learned a Maimah once in Likkutei Torah Rosh Hashanah about tshuva, Mikel Kamoicha. The Chazal say tshuva kadma la'olam, because what tshuva is going to the place beyond time and beyond space. That's what tshuva is. And over there, you can go back retroactively. You could redefine your past.
Right,
You're not anymore infinite.
Right. So when we say the name is perception, it's more than perception. The name is really the chiyus. It's the energy. The avodah of a person is how connected I am to my essence, how aware I'm of it, how much my essence flows into my life, how much there's a flow from the essence into the light. That's where the avodah is.
Same like the node in the sun.
Yeah, and it defines everything. And even if I shut my window and I pull down the blinds and I pulled a curtain and I put a second curtain and a third curtain, so the light is not coming into my window, right? My room is pitch dark, but the sun is still here. The presence of the sun is still here. It's not like, oh, the sun is now damaged. No. You didn't allow the light to come in. The sun is not damaged. And the sun doesn't get depressed. And the sun is not affected. It's not like the sun is now weaker because you didn't accept its light. No, I didn't accept its light, okay? Hopefully tomorrow I'll get smarter. But the sun is always present, fully. There's clouds. The sun didn't disappear. You know, sometimes a child looks up, there's clouds, the sun disappeared. What happened? The sun didn't disappear. We just don't have the ability to be able to see it because there's a blockage. So you have to remove the blockage. You don't have to create the sun. You have to remove the blockage. And even when the sun sets, it also didn't disappear. It's just coming back. The earth spinning, the sun revolving, both of them, it's coming back. It's not. That's the Yesod. That's the Yesod of everything, yeah. The challenge, of course, is that when the light is blocked, sometimes people start telling themselves that there's no sun. That's part of the blockage. The part of the blockage is that I don't realize that the essence is whole. I don't have where to go back to. That's why it's so important to know this, that even if a person's experience is that everything is black and dark, but the sun is shining. And in the mashal, the sun has to remain above. The sun can't come into this room. In the nimshal, it doesn't work in space, so the whole essence is here. By the sun is still where it is, it's far away. That's why the worst thing you could tell a child is, du bist a verdorbener Engel. Du bist a verdorbener Ying.
Which means verdorben.
Verdorben is mushchat, disgusting, repulsive, corrupted. It's a terrible thing to say. First of all, it's not true. That's the first thing. And what the child is hearing is that his or her core is broken, is horrible. And now, at best, they have to justify their existence and somehow do things that the other person will be able to say, you're not Fadarbin. You have hope. But the whole thing is not true. It may be that their behavior is not reflecting their beautiful essence. That's true. But that's a whole different story. So you want to bring out their essence. You don't want to bring out how bad they are.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.